In here. Everyone gonna get their king-pilled fix after a brief interlude of no king-pilled. I hope everyone survived okay.
It's a good vacation.
It was a very good vacation. And I want to tell everyone a bit about what I learned on our vacation to basically the whole western half of the whole west coast. We covered the entire thing, and I saw a lot of different territory, and it was interesting. I learned a lot, and I had many thoughts as I drove through what was like 90% of it was a desolate wasteland.
Oh yeah, this is your 40 days in the desert.
Yeah, that's what it was.
He's gonna come back. He's gonna come back to us as the Messiah or the new king.
That's why I'm trying to hide my hair so that people don't get it. Okay, so let me change this up here. As you guys can see now, our good friend Liberal Steve is out of the office today. He is busy doing the real work, actually making some money and supporting himself. So our good friend Mr. Popular is back to have another chat about architropism, and we want to make sure that we get in a few good jabs and maybe a left hook or two on libertarians and conservatives for being stupid and completely.
Well, a little bit more conservative this time. I think we're going to be a little merciful on the libertarians because they weren't a part of this.
That's true. That's true.
Thing.
Right, but even then, even the libertarians, their response was no better. It just they just didn't get it for a whole different reason, and we'll get into that. In a little bit.
I mean, it's good to have a libertarians as a whipping boy. Every king is a whipping boy.
Right. Okay. Oops. That's not right there.
And I should distinguish for legacy libertarians, the old, out-of-date model.
That's right. Yeah, legacy libertarians was a great term that you coined recently. You seem to be the guy who coins the terms. You coined the terms, and the rest of us will talk about them.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's now up to date. So now we've got this here.
I'm really hoping we can get that signal boost from James Lindsay, but doesn't look like it's coming.
Yeah, no, he doesn't necessarily strike me as the type to signal boost other people's stuff, especially other people's original content. That kind of seems like that goes against his MO, which is fine. Different people like to operate themselves differently. Let's close
but he's talked about this concept before, where things are this kind of cycle. And
yes,
I'm like, come on, man, just like give it the one word, and you can talk about it, and you can skip all of these paragraphs.
Someone had asked in the past. They said they commented on one of the episodes in the past, and they said, shouldn't it be Arco? What did they say? Arco. Let me see if I can find
dynamics.
It was maybe that was one of them. Someone had a different suffix or the latter term, and I wanted to find out why I wanted to get your response to it and find out why you chose architropism. Architrophy. That's what he said. Wouldn't architrophy be the proper term? What do you have? What's your response there?
Yeah, well, ism is for a process.
Right.
Yeah, that's the it's the process of turning. But archotrophy, that might be to turn, but but this is the process of turning. So that's why I went with that.
Okay,
but
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fairly close.
There's actually speaking of James.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, speaking of James Lindsay, this is something else we'll touch on later in the show. I had a post of something that he had a really great thread a year ago today, actually, and I posted it on Facebook with some of my thoughts, and it was kind of funny reading it again and being like, okay, I was saying this a year ago, and I was these ideas had come together to this point a year ago, and it's interesting seeing me alluding to things and not even realizing that I'd alluded to them, and it's like new truths that have made themselves known to me since then that I was unaware of the fact that I was bringing them up back then. So we'll go through that here at the end after we get through the main subject of today's show. Okay, that's there. Amy has a fan on. I have a fan on.
I think that might. Okay, that might be me too, because the AC vent is coming straight down onto where I'm sitting. Usually, I love that, but I don't know. I just turned it down. Did that help at all, Amy?
Yeah, I don't hear anything on your end, so I guess maybe if something's coming through, then people might be able to hear it. I really don't think that my fan is the thing that's causing it, but I don't hear anything on your end.
Carlos, adios, or not adios.
Orale.
Ole, yes.
How you doing, what's up, Carlos? Brother? We were about to name drop Carlos here in just a minute, as I was going to do our little ad read here for Paloma Verde, so I'll just do that now. We've got a few people watching, so this is a passion project. Obviously, right now we do this because it means a lot to us, and we care about these ideas, and we want to get more people talking about them. But I really appreciate the fact that Carlos and Vanessa, Paloma Verde CBD, decided that they wanted to sponsor this show. They were willing to give us a little bit of moolah in return for you guys using our promo code and going and getting some of their fantastic CBD products. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com is their website. They got a nice new fancy website there with a picture of Vanessa right there on the front. They didn't use Carlos's picture. I guess they just kind of assumed that Vanessa was the prettier one. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com. That's PALOMAVERDECBD.com, and then use promo code KING. It'll get you 25% off any order over $75. And I've got gummies right here. I got some of these premium THC free CBD gummies, strawberry lemonade. They're fantastic. 10 milligrams of CBD per gummy. And then I've got the soft gels here as well, the premium THC free nano CBD soft gels. They got nano in there. It sounds extra cool. And I remember he said something before in one of the comments about they have some sort of special technology with the nano gels that makes them extra special. So I really enjoy them. I take them every night before I go to sleep. And I've been having way more vivid dreams since I started taking them, which is an interesting effect. And sleeping way better, and waking up and not dragging through the afternoon. Even if I don't get that much sleep, like on vacation, I didn't get very much sleep sometimes with the little man waking up in the middle of the night. But I was driving through desolate wastelands with no issues of falling asleep or anything like that. And I have to attribute that to the CBD, making sure that the sleep that I did get was good quality. Carlos says that he is pretty, asked Vanessa, and that's fair. That is a fair point, Carlos. You are very pretty. Your wife has good taste, and you have good taste as well. So, okay, before we really get into the subject of today, kind of sounds like your audio is being picked up by the camera rather than your mic. Oh, you know what? It does this. When I connect, it will change my audio input. Let me get that fixed real quick, because I'm sure that's exactly what's happening. I don't know.
Wait, hold on.
Yep.
Carlos.
There we go. The audio should sound a lot better now. For whatever reason, whenever I connect to someone with the call here, it changes my audio input, and I have no idea why. But so the fan sound that you were hearing, the white noise, was the fan on the computer that I'm using here. It was howling. That's what it was. Okay. My little MacBook Air is just desperately trying to keep up with what's going on here. So everything looks good. So Mark asks, how was the vacation? And I wanted to get into that a little bit. So the vacation that we took, we did a road trip. It was 15 days worth of driving. We left here in Southern California and drove up, stayed the night in Sacramento, had a very, very bad experience at a hotel there. I was very unhappy with that. And then we stayed at one of the most amazing hotels that we've ever seen in Eugene, Oregon. And then we spent a week up in Kitsap County, where I grew up, with my family there. And that was fantastic. That was really, really good. Really enjoyed seeing them and catching up with them and watching them get to know my son. It's a wild experience as a father. Watching your son meet your father and then hang out with him and talk to him and play with him. That was a great experience. And then we went out to Eastern Washington and visited Walla Walla, which is where the college is that I went to, and visited my cousin who just had a baby recently. And so my son got to meet her daughter, and they got to interact. And She was born super early. She was I think they call it a micro preemie. She was like just over a pound when she was born, and she was one half of a set of twins, and she was the only one that made it. And so it's been a very grueling last several months for my cousin and her husband, as they've been back and forth they were in the ICU, the NICU for a long time, and then been back and
Oh
forth with all
wow.
kinds of tests and everything. So it was good. This is the first time that she ever really got to interact with another baby, and it was Eastwood's first time really interacting with another baby as well. Eastwood thought it was amazing. He loves every person that he ever sees, and he loves being the center of attention. So he was super happy, and he decided to start babbling to her and freaked her out, and she started crying. And thereafter, anytime he made any noise, she'd start crying.
Aw.
She is smart. She's growing up skeptical and wary of boys. So that's a good thing. Anyways,
Yes, I agree. Couldn't agree more.
so after that,
gotta teach them young.
that's right. Yep, they got her going real early, and she's learning well. So after that, we headed down across northeastern Oregon and visited some family in a little town in Idaho called Weiser, which is I'd never heard of it before. It's just barely across the border into Idaho. Very distinct small town feel. If you've been in a small town in the Midwest, you know the feeling, and that's how it was there. Very country, which I like. I enjoy that kind of dynamic. And then from there, we drove down, stayed the night in Boise, and then we stopped in Twin Falls. And this is where I started really getting interested in what was going on. My eyes opened wide when we got into Twin Falls. And it was just one of the most scenic places that I'd ever seen. And the Snake River Valley is amazing. We watched some people base jumping off of the bridge there. This is about a mile away from where Evel Knievel did his attempt at jumping the Snake River on a basically like a souped up motorcycle. And then it turns out so southern Idaho and the Twin Falls area is actually one of the largest agricultural hubs in the US. And there's tons and tons of dairy cattle. I think they said that there's 550,000 dairy cattle in Idaho or something like that. And it's just beautiful country right in the vicinity of Shoshone Falls, which is it's kind of akin to like Niagara Falls except in the West. And just tons of farm country. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's why.
Yeah, it's pretty big, but it was a total desert when there was a whole visitor center there with all the information and everything. It was a total desert up until about 100 years ago, and there was a guy there. I can't remember, Ira Pirine maybe or something like that, and he made it his mission to turn that place into an agricultural oasis. And so it took a ton of engineering to do, but they turned what was basically a high desert wasteland into an agricultural oasis. And now massive amounts of U.S. agriculture is produced in that region. But Twin Falls is a town of like 50,000. It's small, but it's relatively big for Idaho, which I think is a little like 1.5 million people or something like that. So
yeah, he probably had a little bit of help from climate change too. You know, that whole Midwestern region was that high desert will bloom every like 100 years or so, and then it kind of goes away, and then it'll bloom again as the as the procession of the like the Gulf Stream, not Gulf Stream.
Oh, okay.
I forget what the name of it is, but there's a current of water that goes up and down, and it's kind of going up and down in a wave, and every now and then the trough will kind of you'll hit that region and it'll bloom. And that happens about once every 100 years, like all the way down into like Arizona and New Mexico was like the apple. That 100 years ago, that you would never recognize it because it was like the apple or capital of the United States where they grew the most apples. And that was also the same time we had the Dust Bowl, which was kind of at the same time it was it's kind of going up and down in a wave. The up part was what gave us the in the Midwest, slightly to the east, was what gave us the Dust Bowl, and that happens like roughly every 100 years, and that's about to happen again. So
interesting.
If you're buying high desert land in Idaho, it's about to be not so desert anymore.
Interesting. So where is the Dust Bowl today? If it used to be just east, where is it migrated to now?
Again, the when the it's a like a waveform. So all it did was move slightly. So that basically the trough part is now like over the Atlantic Ocean, and
Okay.
actually it's probably closer to Europe now. So the you're probably going to get Europe's about to get some low water marks, to say the very least.
Interesting.
And I think there have been some, actually, I think now that I'm thinking about it, there have been some stories about that where they have these they're called drought zones, where they put it in the they put it in the river to say, if you see this, it's a drought. and they're like hundreds of years old, and they're finding them now because the water levels are going down so much. But that's because of the precipitation actually moves. With these current, what are they? Hadley cells. There we go. It's the Hadley cells that they go up and down, and wherever their intersection is with I think it's the Ferrel cells. I'm not sure. It's not the polar cells. I think it's the Hadley cells and the Ferrel cells were kind of like equatorial. And anyway, wherever that intersection is where you get the ups and downs. So anyway, but also, this is the same thing that brings all of it's the same system, because you have the polar cells up above it, and that's what brings the cold down in wintertime. These cells just move over. By the way, one of the tricks they'll do is for climate change, when they're trying to prove that the Arctic is warmer than ever, is they'll start taking a lot of data when we're getting the cold draft, that means the Arctic is getting the warm draft, and that's when they take all of the signs that all of the data points to say, oh, look how much the Arctic is warming up, and that's one of the frauds they'll do. That's how they do it. So at the same time, we're getting all the
You guys tuned in to hear Matt Walsh getting dunked on, and instead you got a lesson on climatology. We serve a lot of interests here at King Pilled.
You can get a lot of really excellent climate science from Ben Davidson. That's my guru that I go to 5 minutes every single morning, and in 30 days you'll know quite a lot about how the climate really works. So anyway, and how they do their frauds. 5 minutes every morning, and it's perfect.
That's anyway. One day I want to start a podcast talking just about Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson subjects. But that was the other thing too. It was driving out through that area and seeing the remnants of like the Bonneville flood and the other major catastrophes, climatological catastrophes that hit the area. I mean, at any point over the last several thousand to several 100,000 years. And there was areas we were driving through, and Amy was even pointing them out to me now, because I do this now. As we're driving through these areas, I'm always like, look, you can see here, this is very clearly used to be the top of a mountain, and now we're driving on a floodplain. Like, it's really obvious. And once you view it from that way, it's kind of like your scale zooms out, and you realize that you're looking at a floodplain that's just like miles wide. And so then Amy started doing the same thing. She was like, hey, look, you can see here, that's the top of a mountain, and you could see this is like a river. There's like rivers winding through, the river is 8 or 10 miles wide. And so obviously, given the height of the hills, you're talking about a river that's, 5-10 miles, something like that, and 2,000 feet deep. There was clearly water flow that ran through and just carved this trough out. And there's nowhere you can see that better on Earth just about than the whole area kind of between the Cascade Mountains and the Rocky Mountains throughout eastern Washington, the Scablands, all the way down across northern Nevada and eastern Nevada, all the way through there. It's just some of the most amazingly desolate, stunning, beautiful country. And it's all high desert. We stayed in Ely, Nevada, which was, I think it's like 6,400 or 6,700 feet in elevation. And random interesting fact that I didn't know is that Santa Fe, New Mexico, is, I think it's like 7,500 feet in elevation. I had no idea it was that high. But as a capital city, it's half a mile higher than the Mile High City, which I thought was very interesting, because I was having a hard time with the elevation. I have asthma, and I was having a hard time breathing, and woke up in the middle of the night, like struggling, had a headache, didn't feel well. And so I decided, I was like, okay, well, what other cities have this kind of thing? If I'm going to lay here awake, gasping for air, then I'm going to try to see what other cities have really high elevations that people have just adapted to. Um, and so that was
Basically everywhere in Mexico is it's the altitude that makes that temperature livable, because you get lower temperatures up on the high mountains. And that's why in all of Mexico, all of the population centers they're not down in the tropical rainforest, which is like hell. And it's actually they live on the high desert plateaus, because that's where you get the nicer temperatures, and that's where you can do agriculture.
What's
Too
interesting
hot, you can't
is
do agriculture. Too cold, you can't do agriculture. And so populations will tend to want to be a little in between.
right.
And that's where you get that.
There's a all of the major grains and like rice, and I don't know if it's millet, and all the wheat, all the different major grains have all, you can trace them all back to, it's like 7 different major centers that are all approximately, I think they're all close to the same latitude. Yeah, latitude, close to the same latitude all around the Earth, and they're all areas of elevation. They're all up in the mountains. And so it's almost like there was a gigantic flood that like swamped most people, and the ones who escaped up into the mountains to get away from the flood. And then they took the crops that they had with them up there, and then they reseeded the earth from there. It's all, it's almost like that story kind of holds true. If you read the book by Richard Hapgood, the guy who talks about Earth crust displacement, he details that in that book.
Oh, he was a CIA plant, though. He, that particular way he did that theory was designed to discredit the whole idea of Earth crust displacement. And that was actually what you really want to look at is the Chan Thomas version, which was the one that the CIA classified at the same exact time Hapgood was going around giving his theory, which was again designed to be debunked. And we know it was designed to be debunked because he had access to the same exact information that from the polar expeditions that the U.S. had been doing that would have told him all of that was completely wrong. And,
interesting. Okay.
And it's the Chan Thomas one that says it's basically it's the 90-degree flip, and his was like it's like 14 degrees or something like that randomly, and whereas the Chan Thomas one was no, every like 10 to 15,000 years, it's a 90-degree flip, because what you have is okay. Oh, I won't go into that, but that's a really fascinating discussion. You can learn more on the Suspicious Observers channel, which again, that's Ben Davidson. That's my guru for everything climate but he goes into showing exactly why Hapgood was full of shit, and he was working for the CIA, and what they were actually trying to hide was this other version of Earth crust displacement, which was the Chan Thomas one, which they classified at the same exact time. And
so I wonder if so Charles Hapgood's book, The Earth Shifting Crust, was had a foreword from Albert Einstein. Einstein was a proponent of it, and I wonder if that was it. Just on the Wikipedia here, during World War II, Hapgood was employed by the Office of the Coordinator of Information, which became the Office of Strategic Services, which became the CIA. So it's right there on the Wikipedia. So I wonder if Einstein signing on to the theory was part of, we're going to popularize this theory, and we're going to get a big name to go behind it. And Einstein was someone who's like, it wouldn't be possible for his reputation to be tarnished by being associated with something that gets discredited. So he's the one who's going to do it.
Well, and they waited until after Albert Einstein died to release it.
Interesting.
So like he wasn't alive to say, oh no, that's not the theory I signed off on, because Einstein had the same exact information, and that Hapgood did, which would have told him his theory was the details of it were completely wrong. The general idea is kind of correct, but the specific details of how were wrong, and of the Chan Thomas version. And the details all say Chan Thomas, but anyway, but they waited until after he wrote the foreword, years and years before he died, but he didn't get. But it wasn't until after he died that they ended up releasing it, and that Hapgood. And so basically, he wasn't alive to say, "Oh no, that wasn't the version I signed on to."
Interesting.
If he had been alive, he would have known. Oh no, this is more like much closer to a 90-degree flip for certain parts. And whereas you have basically there's what are called LLSVPs. They're large, low shear velocity provinces. They're like, giant mantle plumes that are much denser, and they're coming up from the core of the Earth. And basically these are things that jerk it. Every 10 to 15,000 years, you get a major solar outburst that can move these things, and they start up top and they come down because they're so fucking heavy, and these are more than big enough to pull the whole crust down. And that's not even taking Greenland into account. Greenland and Antarctica are just massive ice sheets that can easily pull the whole crust by themselves. And when you get a major solar outburst, you add in the extra energy to our magnetic field, go straight down into the core. You're adding a whole lot of extra energy to the rock, and at that low velocity zone of the crust, which is like 200 miles down, that right now it's technically a liquid, but but it behaves a lot more like a hard plastic, and because of that, the crust doesn't shift all over the place, but you add a little bit of extra energy to that, and it basically liquefies and go straight down, go straight 90 degrees. And that's the Chan Thomas version, in a nutshell. And they classified that in 1966, and they only declassified it partially in like 2013 or something like that. And that was what gave birth to the new catastrophism movement, the neo-catastrophism movement.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, this is for people who don't really obla what we're oblaing here. Mm-hmm. This is a I would say, if you want to take the route that I took, read Graham Hancock. That was the first thing that I did, because he is such a diligent archiver of facts, and he's the person who, more than just about anybody else, has dedicated his life to trying to study. I don't like to say alternate history. I've tried to avoid saying that before, because alternate implies, it's kind of like saying mainstream press. It gives too much credibility to the other narrative. So what it is it's the history that nobody's talking about. And just because nobody's talking about it doesn't mean it exists. Everyone understands that the victors write the history books. So if the victors write the history books, the history that they're going to write is going to be favorable to the victors, and it's going to look favorably upon the way that they viewed the world. But if the way that they viewed the world isn't accurate, then the stuff that the true parts that they didn't believe aren't going to get included. And those narratives aren't, really everything that we know, science and history and all this, is just narratives. It's stories that we've told ourselves, built on top of other stories, built upon prior stories. It's just generations of people telling stories to each other and then piling stories on top of that. And so if you get a bad story in there and people build on that bad story, ultimately they're going to be out of alignment with the truth, because that story was bad. That story didn't actually accord with reality. So it works for a period of time, but eventually the flaws in the story begin to be revealed, and it starts to fall apart. And everything that was built upon it falls apart with it. And that's where we are right now. The story that most people in modern times have built their stories upon is a bad story. And this is the case at multiple levels. There's been all kinds of deception and corruption and just outright and then just mistakes. People just building on mistakes, and all of that is combined to create a world of people who are very much out of alignment with reality, out of alignment with the true history, out of alignment with true religion, out of alignment with a lot of things. And so all the strife and the conflict and stuff that we're seeing is a product of that. So anyway, to go back to the story.
Speaking of people who are out of alignment, conservative. Let's go.
There he goes. Perfect segue. Before we segue, I'll just say that go read Graham Hancock and start to familiarize yourself with the possibility that the fake news today isn't a new phenomenon, and that there's that famous amused chimps tweet that said, if the news is fake, imagine history. And that's exactly, this fake news thing isn't new. Conservatives like to say that everything was fantastic in the grand halcyon days of 50 years ago, and it was only just recently with these newfangled kids who mucked everything up, and you would just need to go back 50 years. These issues have been building upon each other for not just generations, for millennia. And if you go look where everyone else isn't looking, you'll get a fuller picture of the world around you. And it turns out that a lot of the stories that we've told ourselves about the nature of our planet, where it came from, where it's going, where people came from, what different people groups existed, what they did, all of those things have been subjected to political pressures for centuries and millennia. And those political pressures have yielded narratives that don't necessarily correspond to what actually happened. But that's a big, big pill to swallow, because it's literally like completely upending your view of the world that you live in, and that can be kind of difficult. So you don't necessarily want to dive in head first unless you really want, or unless you're really gung ho about it. And if you're really gung ho and really want to go down all the different rabbit holes, you can just shoot me a DM on Twitter or something like that, and I'll start putting you in contact with stuff that I'm aware of. And then you can do the same for our friend Mr. Popular here. You can DM him on Twitter as well. He's at Popular Liberty _, and then I'm at Real Kingpilled. But okay, so that was a fantastic little intro of 30 minutes.
Speaking of people who are just not getting it, they've eaten all of the bad stories, all the bad narratives about liberalism and democracy. We need to have a conversation about the conservatives. Normally, we're here to dump on legacy libertarians and put we're in favor of our more modern, king-pilled libertarian version, but we have to take a bit of a detour today because conservatives have made the news yet again.
Yeah, and it's funny, this king-pilled thing really seems to be starting to get some traction. It's starting to move around.
Yeah.
People may not be using the king-pilled term yet, in the sense that, in the same way that people aren't using architropism yet, by and large, but they're going to, because we're onto something with these ideas. And the reason I know that is because lots of people are all deriving these ideas independently all at the same time. And there's power in an idea. Ideas have power, and when that idea corresponds to reality, it starts to accumulate more and more power. So this is when people say, like with libertarianism, people like to say, oh, well, we have all the facts on our side. The facts don't care about your feelings. This is our, we have you in the arena of ideas, we can't be defeated, that sort of thing. People say that, and that's nice. It's nice. That's a nice sentiment. It's true, but you have to actually have the true ideas. And if your ideas aren't gaining steam, then they're not true. That just like by definition, if it was true, it would gain steam. It would at least have a trajectory. It would look like it was gaining steam. There's lots of bad ideas that gain steam because they're promoted and and people are incentivized. So gaining steam isn't necessarily it only works one way. You can't say that because it's gaining steam, it's a good idea. But if it's not gaining steam, it's not a good idea. Because if it was, then it would. So there's this very common sentiment among libertarians and conservatives, especially conservatives, but libertarians too, where they like to talk about hypocrisy. They say, "Oh, look, they're hypocrites." These liberals are hypocrites. They say one thing and then they pretend to care about poor people, but then they vote for people that make life worse for poor people. Or they'll come up with all these different reasons why they're hypocrites, and then they'll dunk on them. They'll point out their hypocrisy and say, "Look, ha ha ha, we caught them. Their goose is cooked. They're done. We finally caught them in the act. Look, they're hypocrites," and nothing happens. And then this happens again. Someone else does something hypocritical. "Oh, look at that. We've caught him. We've caught him in the act." Like AOC. She's sitting here crying at the border. She's doing her whole thing, standing at the border, up against the fence, looking at the poor immigrants on the other side. It comes out later on. It was a photo shoot. It was like a hired photo shoot. It was an empty like concrete pad on the other side. There was nobody even there. It was totally staged. Doesn't matter. Not one iota. AOC is as entrenched in her power as she ever has been. And so people get, like, conservatives, libertarians, they get upset at that. They're like, it's hypocrisy. They're being hypocrites. Yet somehow they're still in power. And this is why good friend of the show, Aaron McIntyre, likes to say, it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. They have the power to be hypocrites. So they are being hypocrites because it suits them. And when you point out their hypocrisy, it suits them because it proves the hierarchy, because they're hypocrites and they can get away with it. And being a hypocrite and getting away with it, there's a term for that, and it's fraud. Saying one thing and doing another and getting away with, that's fraudulent. They're being fraudulent. They're doing it on purpose. Sometimes not
When we say they're doing it on purpose, it's not that every single individual that's participating in this has planned this whole thing out. They're all subscribed to the email list, and someone sent out the email. Okay, here we're going to be fraudulent about this today. That's not how this works. This is an emergent process it's like a spiritual dynamic that is occupying these people's inanimate corpses. And there's no person there. It's just a mindless. It's an NPC. It's just a mindless talking unit that's animated by a spirit, and that spirit is the spirit of hypocrisy and fraud. And so when we say that they're doing it in like deliberately, it's not it's not calculated on the behalf of the individual person. It's that they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. They're doing it, and they're getting away with it, and they're doing it again. And that's a version of doing it and not caring and just getting away with it. And so, go ahead.
That's the incentive. So, basically what you're saying is, okay, I do, fraud X, get paid in power, and get away with it. So therefore, there's no disincentive to tell me not to do it.
Right.
And basically, what you're saying is, look, they just got paid to be frauds. And
right.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and it's like, and because of that, you're drawing attention to that. More people are going to do it because it's like, look, people just got away with crime, and they just completely got away with it. And oh look, isn't it? But what you're implicitly saying is, wouldn't it be nice if you were one of those people? And there's a lot, and this is why it's an emergent process. Is the incentive then is because people got away with it, is to go do it more. Because you didn't punish it. There needs to be an asymmetric, disincentive that overwhelms the incentive to try it.
Right.
In order yeah, go ahead.
If you aren't taking power and putting yourself in a position to punish the fraud or to punish the hypocrisy,
mm-hmm.
then it doesn't matter, because what you're doing when you point out the hypocrisy, you're appealing to. For enforcement on this hypocrisy, you're appealing to the people whose interests are aligned with the people who are perpetrating the fraud. So you're asking them to punish their own clients. And of course they're not going to do that. They're not going to compromise their own power because of the strength of their own morality. They're politicians. And they're bureaucrats who thrive on corruption. Corruption is the name of the game. So unless you're interested in putting yourself in a position to actually do something about it and to ensure that there's punishment for the fraud, then exactly as he's saying, you pointing it out is just advertising for them. You're free advertising for their business,
Bingo.
Their business model. You were volunteering as free advertising for their business model. So someone who actually who manages to stumble across some really good insights every now and then, mixed in between some just preposterous misapprehensions of what's going on, is James Lindsay. I really like James. He's done some really good work, especially on understanding postmodernism to a degree. He's covered the landscape really well, and kind of made a lot of it accessible. He doesn't draw the right conclusions all the time because he's operating from a flawed premise. That flawed premise being that liberalism has to be saved, and that our goal here is to save liberalism. He doesn't realize that all of the work that he's doing is destroying the scaffolding of liberalism and revealing why liberalism is fraudulent at its core. He's trying to save liberalism because he thinks if he can carve away all of the dead wood around it, he'll get back to the nice, healthy, strong core. But he hasn't realized yet that the entire thing is dead wood. And as soon as he finishes carving through it, it's going to be gone. It's not going to be there. So I don't think he's going to come around to that. It would take a just massive change of heart for him to come around on something like that, and he'd have to eat a lot of crow. He's very much entrenched himself in a position of mocking anyone who would suggest that liberalism might be flawed at its core. But I think that doesn't mean we can't learn a lot from him, because he does really analyze the woke movement really well. I think he does because they're liberals and he's a liberal, and so he understands them and is able to speak their language. So he serves as a good interpreter or a good translator. But so in this case, he addressed this AbuelaOC stunt. So for those of you who don't know, AOC the aforementioned, she tweeted something a couple days ago, and I was on vacation, so I wasn't completely following all of this, and I just kind of was vaguely aware of it. I saw the tweet, and I saw Matt Walsh's response to it. Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire, who is he's another one who he really gets it sometimes, but then other times he just really does not get it. And this was an instance of him just really not getting it. So AOC tweeted out a picture of her abuela in Puerto Rico and the house that her grandma supposedly is living in. And it's like paneling is falling down from the roof, and it looks like a complete dump. And you wouldn't want anyone living in those conditions. And she's using this as a political football because she wants to say, well, look what Trump did. Trump blocked money from getting to Puerto Rico, and all these. She's using it as a political cudgel. And missing in this is she replied to that tweet and said her grandma's fine, that she's already cared for and already done something for her, but she's wanted to use this as an object lesson for all the other people who don't have a wealthy, powerful granddaughter to come bail them out. And so the people who are going after her, the fact that she has her disclaimer right there makes you going after her just seem like you're illiterate. So, but leaving that aside, Matt Walsh's response to this from the Daily Wire was, let's set up a GoFundMe for AOC's grandma. And we're going to raise money for to get her out of poverty because AOC won't. And what we're going to do to demonstrate this is we're going to show how conservatives believe in charity. And conservatives are the ones who believe in society because they're willing to engage in activism that actually raises money for someone and actually helps them, rather than just appealing to the state to do something and asking for more welfare. Like, he's trying to make this it's very obvious. It's very much like the obvious thing to do. And everyone is crowing on this as, oh, this is just a fantastic troll. And he just owned the libs real, big time with this one. And I haven't looked. Do you know how much money they raised for it?
It was like over 50 grand. And by the way, I have a grandma that, really,
Right.
really, boys, is she getting terrible service in, the middle of Florida, but I definitely need a fundraiser for her. So if anyone controlled me, I'd really appreciate it.
It just the I don't understand how people look at this and they say, and they're oh haha, they owned them, and I don't. So what you did is you just raised money for AOC, like that, like you're going to give money to her family. You raise money for her. And if you're giving money to AOC, that means you're giving money to Nancy Pelosi. So your goal for an own on them is to raise money for the Democrats, is to explicitly engage in a fundraiser for the Democrats to show that, they don't actually care about helping people. Nobody thinks that they care about helping people. If you're trying to talk to the people who think that they care about helping people, you're talking to the wrong people. What happened to your own people? What about the people on January 6th who just kind of walked through the stanchions in the Capitol building, strolled through there, took some pictures, acting like they were on a tour because the door was open and they were ushered in, and they're going to rot the rest of their lives in federal prison? What about them? Did you raise money for them? No. Oh, you distanced yourself from them. You called them terrorists. Okay, so when it comes to your own people who share your values and who want to who equally oppose the people you oppose, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of a thing. Those people, conservatives and libertarians, can't distance themselves from fast enough. There's this purity thing. Oh, I have to be a pure conservative or a pure libertarian, or we don't believe in the government, yada yada yada. You don't actually look out for the people who share your values, but you'll go fundraise explicitly for the enemy, and you're going to call that an own. Yet you owned someone. Like we said before, these people definitely believe in self-ownership. And Mr. Popular here wanted to highlight at the beginning that he said he wanted to really go after conservatives with this one. He said, and on this particular case, the libertarians need a break because Matt Walsh isn't a libertarian by his own admission, and he's a conservative, yada yada. People want to create a distinction between conservatives and libertarians. By and large, it's mostly a distinction without a difference, but. I can see that. That's fair. We don't want to blame libertarians for the sins of Matt Walsh. So what I'll do is I'll blame libertarians for the sins of libertarians. They were like, oh, we're not going to do anything goofy like that. What we're going to do is we're going to pile in her mentions and go after all of her little peons and tell them, oh, like government is going to do a good job. Yeah, government cares about people. You're so dumb if you think the government's going to help. Really? Like, you actually think that's going to be an effective, like, you think that's going to be persuasive? Like, what's your tactic here? Really, you don't have one. You're just repeating words that somebody else has given you. And I see this all over the place, across all different ideologies. But it's really, really bad among libertarians, where you engage them in conversation, and it's like you just engaged a script that just starts reading itself to you. And they spout off the same lines. They just recite these lines to you, and you reply, and you'll kind of reply. Maybe I'll reply from left field to kind of give them a curveball and see how they handle it. Nope, exact next programmed response. It's always the exact same programming. This is you're just different versions of NPCs. You're just a new program that's not ever going to actually accomplish anything. You're just spouting philosophical points with no understanding for what undergirds them, and with no actual vision for how you can take that philosophy, put shoes on it, and make it walk around your neighborhood. So you're no better than the libertarians that are in this business of the government can't do anything. Your messaging sucks. No one's going to listen to you except for yourselves. And then when you're turning this into a state versus not state conversation, you're missing the plot yourself, because that's not what this is about. This isn't about how the state functions versus how the private sector functions. The public-private sector distinction is meaningless, practically speaking. And we want to get into more of that. We want to go through this James Lindsay thread where he addressed it, because he brought some really great insights in here. But go ahead. Tell me what you're going to say.
I was going to say that, it really is the same script of what the conservatives were doing too. Because look, the conservatives were saying, oh, look how great look how civilized we are, because we're even being kind to our enemies. When they're being frauds, when they're being hypocrites and frauds, and we are rewarding them by raising money on their behalf to do some charitable work for them, and that shows how truly civilized we are. And we are responding to incivility with civility. And then basically what the libertarians end up doing is kind of a one-upsmanship of, look how much more civilized we are than the conservatives. And because the conservatives are doing this, they're really doing the civilization thing the wrong way. Let us show you how it's really done. We're going to pile into their to AOC's mention, the real civilized way. And hi-ho civilization, here we come, Ancapistan.
That's actually a really good point, because they're attempting this one-upsmanship on the conservatives, but then they're not actually doing anything. That kind of perfectly illustrates their role in this conversation. The conservatives do something, and the thing that they do is stupid, and the libertarians don't do anything. They just talk about doing something and then pat themselves on the back for having the best ideas. It really was a microcosm of, it was paradigmatic of or emblematic of the actual role that each of these ideologies plays, and it illustrates architropism, and that was so that was really with the bulk of what we wanted to talk about. Having Mr. Popular on today, since Stephen couldn't make it, that's what we wanted to talk about, because this is James Lindsay goes through and he breaks down what conservatives got wrong, and what he does is he makes a fantastic case for architropism. He's just missing the term for it, which is what will actually make it move. I mean, I guess I shouldn't. The guy has several thousand engagements on the tweet thread, so I shouldn't say that he's doing a bad job of popularizing it. He's doing so far. He's doing a great job getting the message out, but you can get it out even better. Is what we want to say.
Bingo. And I would add that my framework of this spectrum from you have predation on the far left, production on the far right, and your time preference for power is based. It's the spectrum of your time preference for power. When you plot what the left is doing, what the right is doing, and what the libertarians are doing on the far right, having that spectrum makes perfect sense because
Right.
I can see immediately that, oh, this is a one-upsmanship game where the libertarians are trying to one-up the conservatives who are responding with civilization to the left, who is by definitionally uncivilized. Like her doing this sort of architropism fraud that I do like how James Lindsay pointed out. It really is not hypocrisy; it really is fraud, and that's a really excellent point. And the way he pointed out was excellent, and you'll get into it. But she's doing a predator behavior, which is fraud. Because you're trying to get something for really nothing, and through using deception, that's a predator behavior. The right kind of responds like prey. They're giving her something for fraud. And the libertarians, they kind of do the one-upsmanship game because, again, they're libertarians in my framework. They're on the far right. Right is kind of in the middle. The left is the high time preference for power. That's predation. And the right is kind of in the middle, where they're like, okay, we need to guard the production with predation. And the libertarians are on the very far right of this spectrum, where they're saying, hey, we want nothing but production, no predation. And and so when you have that framework in your mind, seeing that this game just plays out perfectly. It's like, This is exactly, they're doing all of their evolutionary roles just perfectly. And so it's a perfect microcosm example of left, right, center, or left, right, libertarian, as from left to far right.
Right. Yeah, libertarian being basically all the people with low time preference. And then low,
zero time preference for power.
The lowest time preference would be zero. So conservatives, the right wing people are on your framework. They're the low time preference, and the libertarians are the zero time preference. So them collectively there's almost like this is why the term libertarian kind of like I can see a case for calling Matt Walsh a libertarian. Like there's a lot that's very libertarian about him, and libertarian itself has a lot of a spectrum to it. So I want to be able to just call all of them libertarians, because fundamentally they all have this vision of liberty that they're just packaging it in different ways, but they're talking about liberty in that sense. And the left wants liberty. The left is libertarian in a sense as well, because they're all about the glorification of the individual, and they have this basis of harm. Like they want to minimize harm, which is kind of like they want to keep people's property rights from being violated. They just have a different definition of what property rights are. So libertarianism it almost encompasses all of them in a sense, because libertarianism is like the full realization of liberalism. Yeah, it's taking liberalism to its ultimate conclusions, and you wind up with, there's gender, like sex isn't a thing on one end, and then you have Murray Rothbard on the other end, and you have this is kind of the whole spectrum of libertarianism. But then we have the people who call themselves libertarians. So it can be difficult to have these conversations, because the people who call themselves libertarians are the ones who are the zero time preference. But in a sense, all of these people are all libertarians in the sense that they're all like liberals who are going balls to the wall trying to out-liberal each other. And libertarianism is just the ultimate conclusion of liberalism. But okay, so let's get into this James Lindsay thread. So you can follow him on Twitter at ConceptualJames. And so he said, a few thoughts on the AbuelaOC stunt. So what actually happened here is that the right, or Walsh, intuited the right move, executed the maneuver effectively, but can't capitalize on the win because they don't know why it's a win, because more hypocrisy, etc. And so here James Lindsay sees this as a win. So he buys into he's basically a conservative at this point. He buys into the view of this being a win. And I agree that executed properly, it could have been more of a win than it was. I don't think that it's the best way to approach it necessarily. But if you'd had the right messaging around it, you could have. But then you would have to follow it up with actually, like, you could use this and you could build upon it. You could follow up on it with like an actual campaign. And then the best way to do this, honestly, would be Republicans to create a bill in her name that does something very right wing. And like that's where you could something that actually has teeth, that actually can become legislation, that actually can be enforced in some sense. and really drag them and put them on the defensive. Like thinking along those lines, you might be able to accomplish something. But the way that they did this was I don't agree with Lindsay that it was a win, but we'll continue with what he says. So he said, it's a win for this reason. It exposes very clearly that AOC and leftists believe the state should solve problems, even in a case where there's an obvious failure. So all they have is to blame the system and others while taking no responsibility. That is, her approach is a fraud. So he sees it as a win because it exposes AOC and the leftists. Basically, it's a win because it exposes the hypocrisy. This is just the conservative position, that if you expose their hypocrisy enough, there's this giant block of moderate voters out there who will just one day wake up and be like, oh, wow, these people are all fraudulent hypocrites. Oh, we better vote Republican. And this is a myth it's so stupid that it's easy for me to believe that this is something that's actually been seeded by like the CIA or something, that they're actually going to promote and install people who are going to sell this idea to gullible right-wingers, because it's so self-evidently not actually realistic, and it's not effective, and it's not ever going to happen. That group of very intelligent but kind of naive, but very well-meaning people out there who are just one day going to wake up and just realize, oh, it was all hypocrisy. It was all that. So I can't believe I was misled. So these evil Democrats, I am so glad that the Republicans are here to save the day and to bring about constitutional governance, which is what I wanted all along. And I just was being hoodwinked. Somehow these guys had hoodwinked me, and I repent of all my past errors, and I will vote Republican for the rest of my life. Like that's just it. When you actually explain it, people are like, oh yeah, obviously that's not going to happen, but their actions imply that they think that that's going to happen. Back to Lindsay. He says, it's not about hypocrisy, it's about fraud. You have to understand both that we live in postmodernity, like it or not, and how leftists use this hyper-real terrain to their advantage, dialectically, to make gains. Hypocrisy, or asymmetry, is the point. Statism is the goal. Let's break that down just a little bit. He said, you have to understand both that we live in postmodernity, like it or not. What he's meaning with that is that the postmodernists control the culture. The postmodernists are setting the terms of the conversation because they're the ones with power. The people who are operating according to the postmodern view. They're the ones who are laying the groundwork. They're the ones who are setting the terms of the debate. For that reason, you have to operate on their playing field until you've built your own that can compete. So you have to compete effectively on their playing field. So that's what he's saying. He's saying, like it or not, you have to deal with postmodernity because it's dominating us. And then he says hyper-real, this hyper-real terrain. And he goes into hyper-reality a little further. It's a concept he's discussed in some of his other stuff, and you can look him up if you want to understand that better. But I think he explains enough of it in this thread that I won't define that for now, but you'll understand it later. So he said, going on to the next tweet, he says, exposing that leftists are pushing for a kind of statism that always fails because it always displaces responsibility is therefore necessary. So exposing the hypocrisy and showing that it always fails is necessary. Okay, sure. Like there's like when you write a letter, you say dear so-and-so so people know who you're talking to. But like that's not the whole letter. You can't just introduce it. And what this is here, exposing that they're hypocrites, that's writing dear so-and-so on the letter. It just kind of sets the terms of what follows after that. But you have to have something that follows after that. Just exposing their hypocrisy isn't sufficient. So he says...
I want to break in for one moment.
Go ahead.
And what he talks about right there of, it always fails because it displaces responsibility. That right there, in one term, I call that anabolic architropism, where they are deliberately, doing a power grab, where they're taking something that a system or a process that is normally privatized to, and fairly efficient, and they're taking it into themselves and saying, no, you're not going to do that anymore. We're going to take the resources for that because we don't like the way you're doing it, and we're going to be the ones who do it. And you see this like with Social Security, police, firefighting, EMS, and like invariably they always do it more inefficiently, but they do this in order to make themselves more necessary. And
right.
Yeah, and this is in two words I can say all of that anabolic architropism and provide a million examples of them doing this. And again, it's designed to make themselves necessary to the public by saying, hey, well, again, this is the answer to, well, how would you do roads and bridges without us?
Right.
And it's like, yeah, we can figure out how to put pavement on the ground. Yeah, we've been doing that for centuries, and we don't need a government to tell us how to put pavement on the ground. But that, this, again, he's perfectly describing the way it works. He's just missing the word, and you can say all of this in just a few words. And that
I kind of like the fact that because like most people, if you say like anabolic or catabolic, most people don't remember their high school science classes, and they don't remember which one's which and what it does and what it means and all that. But I kind of like that some of this stuff is it's not super accessible to the common man, because democracy is bullshit. And I'm not interested in being a part of a democratic movement. And I don't want to be a part of a group of people who don't understand what that means and get hung up on it and move on. If you don't have the intellectual fervor to stick along and to go educate yourself on something like that to continue with the conversation, that's fine. Like I don't hold it against you. I don't think you're less of a person. It's just this needs to be a conversation that isn't being had democratically among the masses. The masses need to be instructed about what they're going to do. They need to be instructed by the people who actually understand the territory. This was the whole idea of republicanism to begin with. The idea of having a republic, that it's not just a straight democracy because the masses are out of their minds. You don't just give power to the masses. You have to filter it through competent people. The problem is that on a long enough timeline, it goes the exact same direction because you're still incorporating the masses. The masses can't be incorporated. They can't be a part of the governing process. The masses need to be governed. That's the reason for a government. You introduce a government because people cannot govern themselves. And when people govern themselves, everything goes to shit. That's the reason why governments are established in the first place, because it will always go to shit, and someone will capitalize on that and say, hey, look, everything's going to shit, so we need to have a government. And that process will continue, because then for them, having things go to shit becomes a feature, not a bug. Because every time things go to shit, it gives you an opportunity to consolidate power and to expand the government, to create a new government. That's what you're doing. When a revolution, it starts here and it goes around and comes back again. Starts here, it goes around and comes back again. That's a revolution. So you have to keep reinventing your government as you go. And that's what happens with democracy, with republicanism. They keep reinventing the government over and over again because it fails. And the fact that it fails is a design feature. It's not a flaw. It's a design feature in it for the people who are already in power, because they're the ones who can navigate each failure. And they're the ones who can kind of like walk atop of the waves as everything is roiling underneath them, and they can transition through catastrophic moments. So, and that's architropism. That dynamic is architropism.
And to bash republicanism just a little bit more, it's the fallacy of those restaurants, they had them for a little while, where you go to the restaurant in order to cook your own food. Because why do you go to a restaurant? So if someone else who knows how to cook can cook for you, and instead you're going to the restaurant to cook your own food, and this is like some lefty progressive thing, and you're showing how progressive you are, or something like that, by going there and cooking your own food. And what it just ends up tasting crappy, because these people don't know how to cook. This is why we have specialization. And yes, and part of specialization is people as rulers who are specialized as rulers. And this is a natural evolution. And so, some people who are evolved to be, construction workers, others who like to, write code, others are podcasters. And because they're really good at entertainment and communication, they have communication skills that have made them specialized for this. And people have a specialization for statecraft. And when you say, okay, well, everyone needs to be a part of state, well, what you're doing is including a bunch of people who are not specialized. This is like saying, okay, you have some people are specialized to be plumbers, and then you're going to say, well, everyone needs to be a plumber now. It's like, well, no. It's like, no, they don't. We have some people who are really good at it, and then there's other people like me who aren't. And I don't know about plumbing. I don't really know how that works. And I prefer to just pay someone who's an expert at it to do it properly, rather than let me have water all over my bathroom.
I like that you said before that people are really bad at voting, but they're really good at shopping.
Yes, exactly. Bingo. That's one of my favorite catchphrases. Is that it's so much easier to get people to identify a good price. They can identify a good price and a good value for a service that they're willing to pay for. They're actually pretty damn decent at doing that. And whereas if you had statecraft with a price on it, they could figure that out pretty quickly. What's the best way of doing that? But makes every vote count is equally, republicanism too, and therefore you can't tell the price. You can't tell what's valuable and not because it all looks equal. And this is the central fraud of liberalism, is that everything is equal, all humans are divine, and like no, we're not. And everything is unequal. Man is unequal by nature, and
yes.
you have to put a price on it, to show what value is, and that's a really effective mechanism for doing that. And unfortunately, and again, by trying to save liberalism, you're trying to save this idea that everything, that this particular value for statecraft is all equal, and it's not.
Yes. And when this idea that everyone must be equal, whether it's equal, so for libertarians, everyone must be equally free. Everyone must have equal freedoms. We all must have equal rights. Where have you heard that before? That's communism. Everyone must be equal. We are all equal. The playing field must be flat. This is like the libertarian anarchist vision. That's indistinguishable from communism. So this is you referenced the Pete Quinones and what did you say, Monica Perez? Is that her name?
Yeah.
The conversation they were having, where she said to say what she said that he was agreeing with.
Oh, they had a excellent conversation very, very recently on her show, which is the Propaganda Report, and Monica Perez had one-liner after another, and one of the ones that I just it hit me. I'm like, oh, this is an excellent way of putting it. Is that when you break down a government and you abolish your government and get it out of the way, because they were having this conversation about anarcho-capitalism. And she said, hey, when you break down a government and get it out of the way, you're not making room for liberty. You are making room for world government, because that's what's going to come in and replace it. And nature abhors a vacuum. And when there's a vacuum for statecraft, which is a service people always demand and want to pay for, and clearly they're willing to pay for it. We just paid like 10 trillion last year. It was 50% of our fucking GDP. We were willing to pay to statecraft. And that's what they're willing to pay for this thing. And and frankly, they were probably willing to pay a lot more than that. And because it basically has an infinite demand curve. But what she was saying was that when you get rid of this thing, what's going to replace it? It's not liberty. It's going to be world government, because and Pete was agreeing with it the whole way through. And because he started to get this get this idea, and hey, if our legacy libertarian idea, and I do distinguish between legacy libertarians, the kind of more modern libertarians, which I think are like the king pill definition of libertarian. And I know Matt's going to hate me for saying that, but we have to use the word. We don't have a new word for libertarian yet that besides king pill.
Right.
The more king pill libertarians, which are version of libertarians, I'll put it like that, and or the anti-libertarians, which is another competing, another term. But she was saying, hey, that when you get this thing out of the way, this is going to get replaced by world government. And Pete Quinones had kind of responded to that as, if we have this great idea, why is it that nobody wants it? And that's because your idea is not based in truth. Again, the reason your idea is unfit, again, this is an evolutionary competition. This is a Darwinian competition for ideas. You don't think of ideas so much as good and bad or moral and immoral. You think of them as fit and unfit for the reality. And some really bad, pernicious, evil ideas, they win because they're simply more fit for reality, which is basically a Darwinian struggle. And the central idea of the right is to come up with ideas that are more that promote civilization away from the Darwinianism. But at the same time, you have to have them that they're still close enough to reality. They still have to fit to reality. You can say, but that's the idea. As a good right winger will kind of change reality towards more civilization. Good right wing policies will move the civilization closer to the production end of the spectrum, whereas a good leftist will try to move it more to the predation end of the spectrum, and that's the tug of war that we're having. And this is something that legacy libertarians and conservatives, modern conservatives, just aren't getting, and that's why when they try to use the left's own tactics, that doesn't quite work, because what you end up doing is, again, you're trying to win power by being a leftist instead of by being a right winger. There is a right winger path to power and a libertarian path to power, but again, you have to understand first that this is a tug of war, and you need to be tugging it towards the lower time preference for power end of the spectrum. Any good libertarian policy will lower the time preference for power, even if it's just microscopically.
Right. The role of the right wing is to differentiate between the good ideas and the bad ideas. And as soon as you said this is a bad idea and this is a good idea, you just created a hierarchy. Hierarchies are natural. There's good and there's bad. And the role of the right is that differentiation. When you just say, oh, well, all ideas are equal, all ideas are created equal, which is another way of saying that is to say, basically like, do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt people or take their stuff. You're basically saying that all ideas are created equal. And you've just changed the conversation into what constitutes harm, and you're going to lose that conversation. The don't hurt people and don't take their stuff is a fun little catchphrase, but if that's the guiding light of your ideology, you are not going to promote the world that you want to live in, because the vast majority of people want to hurt other people, or they want to do things that hurt other people and they just don't care. That's why governments exist. That's why hierarchies are established. Those hierarchies exist because they constrain that harm. And you can't flatten those hierarchies. You need to make them stronger. And part of being strong is you can't be rigid. You have to be flexible. Strength is flexibility. Someone who's not flexible isn't strong. Someone who's not strong isn't flexible. These two things go hand in hand. So this idea that you have to have interplay between the left and the right, no, you don't. The true right, by definition, doesn't need a left to bounce ideas off of. The true right, by definition, is flexible enough to adapt to reality as it becomes evident and to mold itself with reality. It's an emergent process. The right wing is not conservative in the sense that it's constantly looking backwards and trying to just preserve what was here. The right wing is actively incorporating new data and new information to maintain a flexible, adaptable structure. But that structure has to be retained. If you tear that structure apart, if you break it down to try to build a new structure on top of it, then you're going to get a world of no structure. And that's what Monica Perez is getting at when she says that if you destroy the state, you're not going to replace it with a libertarian paradise. You're going to get global government. And this is why I foresee over the next several years, libertarians, people who currently consider themselves libertarians, are going to get sucked in by this move toward corporations beginning to act as government agencies explicitly. Like corporations taking ownership of a given plot of land. This whole idea of, or not a given plot of land, but like a given region. Yep. This whole idea of shareholder
territory.
What?
They're going to start being explicit providers of statecraft.
Right, exactly. This whole idea of
land for statecraft.
This idea of stakeholder capitalism that Klaus Schwab is talking about. If you go read that definition, read his description of stakeholder capitalism and what it is, and you'll see, if you have your eyes open while you're reading it, you'll recognize that he's basically saying it's the responsibility of corporations to act as governments. And what you're going to see with this is they've laid the infrastructure, they've got the baseline ready to put forward the argument that we can't keep bothering ourselves with these government, like the government moves too slowly. The government is corrupted by all these evil right-wingers, all these evil racist bigots. We need a new government. But it can't be the same one. It's going to have to be a government that's led and directed and facilitated by these corporations. That's why the corporations are starting to take a really active role. They're having proactive political opinions. We're shifting toward that, toward explicit governance by corporations, corporations explicitly providing statecraft. And a lot of libertarians are going to get sucked into that because they're going to use that rhetoric, because that rhetoric is going to be very effective at getting a lot of ostensibly right-wing people to work with them. And ultimately, if you want to conquer a people group, the most costly way to do it is to attack them on their face. The most effective way to conquer them can be to get them to welcome you with open arms as you conquer them. And you should recognize that phrase because it's been used before. So this is the way, like, this is what's going to happen. This is the way forward. I'm convinced of it. And rather than fighting it, recognize it and use it to your advantage. This is where our people need to be focused on creating the sorts of institutions and organizations that can compete on this playing field, they can take control of a certain region and provide statecraft services for that region. And if that region doesn't exist, invent it. I just drove across like half the western half of the United States. There is more than enough territory out there to do what you might want to do with nobody around to bother you. It's going to take a lot of engineering. It's going to take a lot of planning. It's going to take a lot of infrastructure and a lot of investment. And making yourself independent of the regime is going to be very difficult. But that means that it's a problem that people need to start solving it today and working on it now. We don't have time to keep delaying. This problem is all the arguments people might bring up against it. Oh, well, it wouldn't work for this or that or whatever other reason. You've just created the checklist you just created your own to-do list. These are the problems that need to be solved. Get involved in this. Don't take over the LP. That's not going to do anything for you. Start solving this problem. Time is short. You have to people need to get on this now.
And there's another way you can kind of, just logically prove this to yourself that this is in fact the future we're facing, is that, again, the central reason why, this liberalism has failed, or, and libertarianism and conservatism by extent, is both ideas deny the reality that man has a time preference for power. Everyone says no, they're all good, by nature, and they don't, and libertarians kind of backdoor this a different way because they will say, oh no, man's nature is evil, that's why you don't give him power. And the problem is that, with that is no one's for power. They're kind of taking it by force. That's kind of the point. It's like, bad people who are evil don't ask for permission. They're not asking permission. That's
right.
Kind of, and that's why that one line of, oh, well, humans are evil, therefore you don't want to give them power of a government. And it's like, you're not giving it to them. That's where the central lie is. And in that line of thinking is that you gave it to them voluntarily. No, you did not. And they took it at gunpoint. And
right.
This is like saying, well, I paid my robber. It's like, well, it's like, well, if the robber has a gun to your head, why would you pay him? It's like, because he has the fucking gun to my head. That's exactly why I paid him. And they have this central. This is the lie. The lie at the center of all liberalism and all liberal ideologies, and liberal libertarianism, your legacy libertarianism, as I call it, is that man does not really have this nature where this idea of that man has a time preference for power, that this is contrary to his nature instead of directly in line with it. And because this actually is fundamentally true about man, that they do have a desire for statecraft. This taxation is not theft if they really want to pay for it.
Right.
It's like, let's say, like, if this, it's like, well, it's again, if they were really paying their taxes and just haggling about what the price should be. It's like, because at this point they've already agreed they want to pay for taxes, that in order for statecraft services, they're just haggling about price, like 39 or 35, and whatever. But again, that like, because of that these corporations have started to recognize that, oh, this statecraft thing is fucking profitable as fuck. It's like, forget what we were doing that was productive. This is way more profitable. This was $10 trillion last year. It's like, there's no industry. and that's just in America. Worldwide, forget it. It's like, and you have global national corporations that have recognized this profitability of statecraft, and they're like, yeah, how do we get? And that's the thing they're trying to figure out how to solve right now. That's what in the future where they're going to be working with government pretty much to supplant government and make themselves the government.
Exactly.
And they're going to be trying to move the transition needle towards private statecraft. That's what they're going for. And the libertarians are I should say legacy libertarians, the libertarians of liberalism are going to get sucked into this because again, this kind of is where we want it to go, but boy, is this not going to work out well. Good for us because there's a whole bunch of things that they're missing, that these corporations are missing, and this is not going to work out well for us. But
they don't. Legacy libertarians don't even have a theory of power. They to them power. It's almost like it doesn't even exist. They definitely buy the Lord Acton's maxim, which is actually I've been convinced is not true, where he said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's not even that it's wrong. It's just that it's incomplete. It's incomplete and wrong. Power doesn't corrupt. Unaccountable power corrupts. Accountable power is one of the most purifying things imaginable.
Yeah,
but you have to have power and responsibility together. They have to exist together. You can't give someone power and not hold them responsible, and you can't hold someone responsible without giving them the power. Like, both of those don't work. You have to have the two together. And when you have them together, it's a beautiful thing. It's an absolutely glorious, wonderful thing. But getting those two together, that's the engineering problem. That's where you're not dealing in the realm of moralities and shoulds and ifs and abstracts and stuff. You're literally just planning out creating like the contingency plans and engineering a process whereby people are incentivized to participate in a system in a way that when they participate in it, it makes the system better. And then different people have different roles within it. So getting back to the libertarians not having any idea of how power works, this applies to conservative. This is why there's the broad liberals in general, conservatives, liberals, libertarians. They will treat the other side as in good faith. They'll act like they're operating in good faith. Like, if you think that pointing out their hypocrisy is a gotcha, that implicitly implies that implicitly that you think that they're supposed to be acting according to good faith, and that you think that they think that they're acting according to good faith. It's gotten to the point where lefties will very clearly they've said for years now that Republicans are evil and they're not acting in good faith, and that's very normal. It's very fashionable in popular society to say that Republicans don't act in good faith. But there's like this like urge that it's like, if we keep treating lefties like they're acting in good faith and we keep pretending that they are, then somehow they'll be like guilted into acting in good faith, and that'll never happen. So treating them with good faith is a sucker's bet. Right. Okay.
And what it really is both sides are projecting onto the other, whereas the left says that the right is evil, and the right says that the left is misguided. Both are projecting because really the right is misguided, the left is evil.
Right. Yeah.
And they're both projecting onto the other. And then, no. You really need to start treating the left as they're evil because you, the right winger, are kind of misguided. And by the way, I'm using right winger to kind of mean, you're constitutional conservative. You're misguided about particularly the left's nature. These people are, it's not difficult. This is not rock. Oren McIntyre, he also had an excellent tweet a while ago. He retweets it every now and then that, this is not rocket science. They're evil and they want to diddle children.
Yes.
Like, that's what they're up to. And this is where that's going. And, again, try to bring it back to our discussion of this stunt that, I'm reading from James Lindsay. Go ahead, because the stunt that capitalized on the fraud, not hypocrisy, at the heart of leftism, aka liberalism, today, that it's pushing pushing a bogus product by savvy sales. The right, by comparison, mobilized and produced results about to wait for the government to do something it'll screw up.
There was a tweet, actually. The rest of the first tweet there, I hadn't read yet. So let me see. So he said statism is the goal. Then that first sentence that got us off onto this big segue, he said exposing that leftists are pushing for a kind of statism that always fails because it always displaces responsibility is therefore necessary. So he's describing he's identifying the nature of the game. That's and like you just pointed out, exposing that leftists are pushing for a kind of it's not leftists, that's liberals. That's the liberal name of the game. That the system always fails because it always displaces responsibility. So continuing with him, he said, showing that they pull this off repeatedly in rhetorical or postmodern space where they've rigged the game, e.g. blaming Trump, is too. So he phrased these kind of awkwardly. So let me rephrase that. So he said, he's saying that it's also necessary to show that they pull this gambit off repeatedly, both in rhetorical space, which would be postmodern space, and where they've rigged the game. For example, blaming Trump for their own stuff. It's necessary to point these things out, is what he's saying. And so then he said, the stunt by Matt Walsh capitalizes on the fraud, not the hypocrisy, at the heart of leftism, or at the heart of, it's really liberalism, but the fraud at the heart of leftism today, that it's pushing a bogus product by savvy sales. So they're very good at selling. This is why I got into doing all of this stuff, because I was working with Jason Stapleton studying sales and marketing and understanding like behavioral economics and how people operate and how people make decisions and like how all of that, the psychology of that, how it all works. The left understands people. This is why the left directs the culture, because they get how people work. They're the ones who are acting in accordance with reality more than the right, more than conservatives, more than libertarians. They're actually engaging with people according to the way that people actually work. They understand how to sell. They just have a bogus product. The right, in generally speaking, again, they're misguided. They have a good product, sort of, but they can't sell it at all. So they've got a problem there where they can't sell and their product isn't that great. So you have to get a good product and then you have to learn how to sell it. The right, back to Lindsay's words, the right, by comparison, mobilized and produced results because they aren't about to wait around for the government to do something it'll screw up. So the right was acting the way that the right normally should act. Like the right shouldn't be getting engaged in politics on these terms. Don't get engaged in electoral politics. It's a waste of time. Start building the routes around the state. Build your own routes to help your own people. You don't need to help everyone. Fuck all the lefties, all these people who would rather see you dead and would rather take your kids. Like, you don't need to create a solution that will solve their problems. Solve your own problems. Solve your problems. Solve your family's problems. Solve your community's problems. Put yourself in a position where your interests are cared for and provided for, and you're free. Like, that's freedom. You've now freed yourself from the system. Then you can go worry about their problems, and you can evangelize them. But you don't need to keep participating in this democracy thing. So the right, he's saying, the right mobilized and produced results because the right can do that when they want to. They just need to get mobilized and directed at the right thing. And so what they did is they illustrated the hypocrisy of the left again, basically is what he's saying. So he says, AOC is saying the government sucks and it's someone else's fault, so give us more power to govern. There you go. There's architropism right there. The government sucks and it's someone else's fault, so give us more power to govern. The troll is saying the government is always bad at these things, and we proved that there are better solutions, and that AOC is a fraud and her leftist program is a fraud. But he didn't prove that. He didn't actually prove that. He just fundraised for them because he didn't.
All you proved was that all they proved was that, okay, my solution might be better, quicker, faster, whatever. That's all you proved was a fraud.
Right, but
these are two separate things.
Right, you don't have anything to build upon it, and the act that you chose to try to illustrate that fraud literally raised money for your enemy. I can't get past that. You literally raised money for your enemy who would gladly see you dead, who would gladly see your children taken from you and all of your values and your belief systems destroyed, and not just destroyed, but eliminated from the history books. So people don't even talk about you anymore in the future. And you raised money for them. He says,
it's like not only are they going to be like owning the libs and saying facts don't care about your feelings as the liberals load you onto the Amazon boxcars. It's like they're also paying for the Amazon boxcar.
Right. It's when they're loading you onto the Amazon boxcar, they're scanning your credit card. They're
exactly.
You are paying to get on the boxcar. Yes.
I know. That was awful.
So James Lindsay continuing, he says, in essence, the stunt shows that AOC believes in statism. Oh, wow. That was a great stunt. It proves that AOC believes in statism, and that when the state fails, more statism is the answer, while simultaneously proving the absurdity of the claim by producing huge material resources to solve the real-world problem in hours. So, again, I'm just going to keep reading. AOC's message, which the right intuited, wasn't one of hypocrisy. It's that she either lies or doesn't care about material harm to real people, even an elder in her family, because her beloved state isn't the one fixing everything. She believes in the state, not community. Okay, so what? Proving that, like demonstrating that, doesn't matter, because the people who already agree with her feel the same way. And the people who don't have another option, because you haven't given it to them, because you're too busy fundraising for the people who hate them. The American institutional right across, conservative Inc. and all the way across a lot of different institutions right now, they've focused all of their efforts just on diddling around with the people who actually have power, who hate them, and have completely abandoned their constituency, who are suffering, who are hurting, who need solutions beyond the, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and embrace the free market, bigot. These people need tangible solutions. They need to actually, just saying, oh, well, everyone is equally capable of doing all these. That's just not true. You've bought into the communist lie that human beings are perfectible. We just have to remove every single obstacle from their way, and their perfection will bloom, will blossom. Most of these people aren't capable of solving their own problems. They're looking for someone to solve their problems for them, and you're just telling them that they're wrong. And not actually providing any solutions for them. So of course they're going to keep going to the AOCs of the world. The only people who are actually taking steps to serve their own constituency, or at least pretending to. So let's see. So okay, she believes in the state, not community.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay, again, I would say it's like you're saying they're saying, hey, there's water all over my floor. This is chaos. I had a bad plumber that I'm going to go to the bad plumber because that's the only plumber, to try to fix my, my leaky pipe, really fix it. And there's still water on my floor. And instead of, providing them with a better plumber, you're saying you're wrong for going to the bad plumber.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, he's the only one. And then the correct answer is, we'll provide them a better one who does fix the problem. And again, the problem for them is I want to buy some statecraft. Where can I buy some statecraft? And she's, the left is selling statecraft, and the right is saying, we're selling kind of bad statecraft.
The right is saying that you should run your company differently, and we're going to come get employed in your company that you own, that you sell statecraft to, and think that we're going to change your company from the inside out. Because the state belongs to the left. The state is the territory of the left. And when you get enrolled in it, when you go and you run for office and all that, at the federal level specifically, when you enroll in that democratic process, it's like you're getting hired at the company of your enemy. This one monopoly provider of plumbing services. You're not creating another company. You're going and you're trying to get a job from them, and then you're going to try to tell them how to run their company. They're the ones who run the only company in town, and their company is so powerful that you didn't even create your own. You just went and got a job from them. That's the role of the right in the current institutional right in America is to go get themselves employed by their enemies and then pretend to solve problems for their constituents. Go ahead and continue what you're saying.
Yeah. I was going to say, mind your business with John Hartman. An excellent point, because him as a plumber, he says, hey, bad plumbers cost twice as much. You end up paying twice, and this is what ends up with what happened with this taxation thing, because let's face it, you raise money to pay for AOC's grandma, and AOC is still going to get the taxes to pay for her grandma.
Yep, that's
like you ended
fantastic.
up paying her twice.
Yep. Very good. Good job, John Hartman.
That was an excellent point.
Yeah, go listen to Mind Your Business with John Hartman.
And we have, by the way, just one final shout out for John. I finally figured out how to put all of my podcasts onto Spotify and iTunes, and the first 3 episodes are my Art of War strategy guide for the libertarian edition of The Art of War. And he and I are doing a kind of libertarian book club together, talking about the Achilles heel of libertarianism, which is strategy, based on the concept that, or I should say the truth, that all politics is warfare, especially in in democracy, it's like a definite civil war.
Right. So it's permanently institutionalized civil war.
And it's one thing to say that you're anti-war and you don't believe in that. Good for you. Don't get involved in politics. This isn't for you. You choose to engage in politics, you need to engage with it as if this is warfare.
Yes,
and,
actually,
you
know what?
Don't win the war by by good messaging. Sorry, that's not going to win the war.
Right. Before I finish reading this, I want to springboard off of what you were saying and make a point that something I tweeted. I don't remember when, but if you call yourself an agorist and you go on Twitter and start arguing with people about politics, or you have a blog where you commentate on politics, or you just go into the public eye and you have conversations about politics, you're not an agorist. You may call yourself an agorist, but by definition, agorism means no political activism. And in a modern digital technocracy, that's also a democracy, a techno-democracy, getting involved in political conversations online is political activism. You are now attempting to affect the state. You're getting involved in democracy by weighing in. So if you believe there's these 2 different avenues that you can take when you believe in basically the general principles that most people that call themselves libertarians believe in. You can go just private. I'm going to create my own freedom. I'm going to do my own thing. I don't give a shit what the state does. That's the Jason Stapleton route. I'm just going to go build. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to increase my own human capital. I'm going to build the world that I want to live in. Then you have the Dave Smith route, where I'm going to go get involved in politics and try to explicitly change things. The most radical side of the Jason Stapleton wing call themselves agorists, which is people who explicitly work outside there's different specific tactics with it, but basically they're going to work in the black and gray markets. They're not going to participate in the open markets. They're going to basically do everything they can to exist completely off the grid, completely out of, disconnected from the system. And their idea is to work completely disconnected from the system, and eventually, as enough people do that and just check out of the system, eventually the system will collapse and everyone will just exist peacefully outside it. I think there's all kinds of issues with it, but the biggest thing is agorists love to go jump into other people's conversations and just act like they're the high and mighty hoity-toity ones because all the rest of you guys are wrong. Doesn't matter what your positions are, you're all wrong. You should be an agorist like me and not get involved in politics at all because politics is evil, taxation is theft, yada, yada, yada. If you're doing that, you're violating your own premises. You're fighting against your own ideology, which is that people don't get involved in political activism. You're being a political activist. And so then that's hypocrisy. And because you don't have any power, it's just hypocrisy. It's not even as good as fraud. It's just hypocrisy.
And I mean, that really should be like the first question you ask an agorist is, what are you selling? It's like I don't care what your politics are, and by definition, you should not care about mine. But
Right.
you might have a product to sell, and maybe I should buy it. What are you
Right.
selling me?
Right. The conversation shouldn't
And
touch
this
on
is
politics at all.
And I mean, that's the Jason Stapleton route, of algorithm, which is by far the most consistent and most effective, because you actually do get results for it. Wealth, power, influence.
Right.
Usually in that order.
It's funny.
Go
Before
ahead,
I finish the James Lindsay tweets here, I just noticed that in his bio he says he's apolitical. That's the exact same thing I'm talking about. James Lindsay is clearly not apolitical, and it may be ironic because I don't think it is. The rest of it isn't. He says non-New York Times bestselling author, math PhD, founder of New Discourses, apolitical, against totalitarianism and supremacy of all kinds, for freedom, with 3 American flags. So he's apolitical, but he's also against totalitarianism and against supremacy of all kinds. Anyways. Let me finish reading these last. He says there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tweets left. He says 2 final points. This stunt was a win in postmodern hyperreality, the Matrix. This is where it's really good. The stunt was a win in postmodern hyperreality, or the Matrix, but the right doesn't know how to move wins in hyperreality into wins in reality. The right doesn't know how to get away from rhetorical win, or how to take a rhetorical win and turn it into an actual tangible win. So really, it's just not a win. This is where he gets into hyper reality, and you can kind of understand from the context here what hyper reality is. It's sort of like the online milieu. It's like abstracted away from real reality. Now everyone is existing in this digital world, which corresponds perfectly with the postmodernist skepticism of institutions and esoterical mysticism, all that kind of thing. It's hyper reality. So now stuff happens online, and remember, it was for like years up until even recently, even still today, people be like, "Oh, that was online. That's not real life." It is real life. Online is real life, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes if something just happens online and you can't take that into reality, then it just happened in hyper reality, and it didn't. It's just it was a rhetorical thing, but you didn't actually turn it into a tangible win. And he elaborates. He says, the right doesn't know how to move wins in hyperreality into wins in reality. Like Trump, they're intuitive trolls, but they can't capitalize on the wins because they can't bridge the worlds. The left, by the way, is extremely good at moving wins in hyperreality into wins in reality, and even better at leaving losses in hyperreality without letting them affect them in reality. That's what happened here. Maybe theoretically, AOC lost in hyperreality, but it's never going to be moved to actual reality, so she didn't really lose anything. And he says that Trump is very good at this latter skill too, which is true. Trump was very good at in this hyper reality that he's describing. Trump might lose something there, but he's like, I don't care. Water off a duck's back. He's going to move on, and nothing is going to phase him. So Trump was very similar to the left in that sense, and that was the whole Teflon Don thing and everything, because he could lose catastrophically in hyper reality, but then in actual reality, it didn't have any effect on him. He kept on moving. He's like, fuck you, I'm president. I'm going to do what I want. Second, the program of leftism is dialectical statism. That is, it's an endless wheel of complaining rhetoric, power, rhetoric, power, rhetoric, power. That's a fraud, however, and it's easily exposed as such. It's also a faith that believes the state is perfectible. This leftist faith is ultimately Hegelian, so it employs negative thinking and utopianism. Quoting Hegel, the state is the divine idea as it exists on earth. Close quote. So the state is its Jesus. This is a dangerously ridiculous notion that most people reject when they realize it. This religious statism is the fraud at the heart of leftism, and so is the fact that all they have to sell it is a certain set of rhetorical strategies that work, but are ultimately empty. The right needs to expose this, explain it, and articulate its alternatives. Right on board with him till that very end. Articulate its alternatives. There are no alternatives right now. That's the problem. The alternatives haven't been created. The alternatives aren't a new political party. This is the libertarians, the Dave Smith libertarians, who are going to take over the LP, and they're like, oh, we're going to create an alternative. No, you're not. The LP doesn't belong to you, and even if you take it over, it still won't belong to you because you're playing on the left's turf. You're trying to mimic them. You're doing the Project Veritas for a long time would do this thing where he would try to do the gotcha journalism that the left does, and it just was never successful for him. He's pivoted it into a marginally more effective strategy by actually getting people on the record saying stuff. But this is just part of the battle. He's just a single player, because it's like everyone now understands. I mean, Congress's approval rating is like 9%, and like all of the people who hold the most power are wildly unpopular. So trying to make them more unpopular is like, you know, the first half of the first step. But you've got to have more than that. They're already unpopular, but there's no alternatives. Nobody else is providing statecraft services or even pretending to. Nobody else is presenting an alternative viewpoint of the world that has the power to overcome the viewpoint that these people are presenting. And until they do, then you can point out that they're hypocrites. You could sell the idea that they're frauds and evil, terrible people and pedophiles, and they want to eat your kids and all this. You could do that till you're blue in the face. But until people have an alternative that they can move toward, they're never going to move. Go ahead.
In defense of James O'Keefe a little bit, what he is doing is torpedoing the credibility of the mainstream media now, and this is actually the proper way of doing it.
Right.
Is he's because there are better outlets for journalism that people should be reading. Like those exist. That is left is just torpedo the mainstream media, and again, not mainstream, but just they're a bunch of radicals. But torpedo the likes, torpedo their credibility. Blow up the Death Star, and and then we can kind of sail off into the sunset, or right off into the sunset, because again, for journalism do exist, and they are better, and and so what he's doing is actually the correct way, part of a self-correcting system, which is the right way of doing it. But problem is we haven't extended that to the realm of statecraft. We have bad statecraft, people hate it, and unfortunately the people who are exploiting this are these corporations, these mega national, multinational corporations, who get that the Congress has an 8% approval rating, and and the government is just hated and nobody trusts it, and this is an opening and we should be the providers of statecraft services. Much better, we're going to do the statecraft and that people want, and are willing to pay for. And again, that's what they're doing when they have all this extra woke crap. The reason they're doing it is people are willing to pay for it. The profits are going up, not down.
Right.
Again, they're paying for that. Like they're paying extra because they like the statecraft.
Right.
That's the added value. That's the value added of the wokeism and that sort of crap. Is that leftists are willing to pay a lot. Leftists are willing to pay a lot more taxes voluntarily. And particularly, they're willing to have you pay more taxes, involuntarily. That's part of it. But also is that they themselves are also a lot more willing to taxes voluntarily. And the fact, whenever we cut them, that leaves a whole lot of extra room for them that they want this. They're willing to pay for it, and they have the money to pay for it, and therefore that gets translated into corporations who are going to start providing statecraft at and as a part of their other productive services. And the government, again, and this is the opening of the bad government that they're giving it to them. That the bad government is going to get supplanted by these corporate statecrafts or corporate statecraft providers. That's who's going to be buying the service that people are willing to pay for. And the rights and the libertarians don't get that.
Right. And if they did,
people are
when they do,
pay for
they will start creating those alternatives themselves. But they have to disabuse themselves of this love affair with liberalism and this love affair with that everyone needs to have an equal say in what happens. This whole Western liberal ideology with all of its different branching viewpoints off of it that are all hinged in this worship or this deification of the sanctified individual that everything must like that. All these institutions all exist to purify the to create the ideal individual by through social engineering and all of that. Like this whole Western liberal project, you have to move beyond it. You have to recognize that these failures are features. They're features in the system. They're not bugs. And exploiting them like bugs is just advertising the features to people who are going to come predate on them. You can't exploit a bug that isn't a bug. You have to find the actual bugs in the system. And of course, the actual bugs in the system, when you find them, you don't talk about them. You don't go sing them from the rooftops. You exploit them. And we're coming up on
the proper exploit. Yeah, the proper exploit here is, again, the left is willing to pay for private statecraft. You need the right and libertarians need to amass wealth, power, and influence and start paying for private statecraft from the right, or from the libertarian point of view. Once you put that out there, that hey, I have a demand for private statecraft from the libertarian point of view or the right wing point of view, is like the market will provide.
Right. Okay,
Go ahead. We're coming up on 2 hours. I'm gonna have to take my shirt off.
Yeah, coming up on 2 hours. There was this post that I wanted. There was another great thread from James Lindsay about critical race theory, and I had some thoughts that I wrote with it a year ago today. It came up in my Facebook memories. So I wanted to get into it today, but we've covered enough ground so far. So what I'll do is I'm just going to tweet out a link to it. And I'm gonna and then I shared it on my Facebook already. So if you're friends with me on Facebook, then you can see it there. And I'll tweet out a link to the post that I made. So you guys can go follow me at Real King Pilled on Twitter, and you can see that thread there. There was one other thing that I wanted to say about the subject today.
There are 2 extra tweets because.
Was there 2 more?
Correctly. He had 2 final points. Let me read. 2 final points. The stun was a win in postmodern hyperreality, the matrix in quotes or in parentheses, but the right doesn't know how to move wins into hyperreality and wins into reality. Like, oh, okay, you read that part. The left, by the way, is okay, never mind. I see you did read all of that.
Oh yeah. We read all that. Okay, yeah, I don't remember what the other thing was I was gonna say. I remember what it was. It was on the James O'Keefe thing that what he's doing is there's value to it, but it isn't a tactic in and of itself. It isn't a strategy by itself. It's a smaller part of a larger process, and that larger process has to go with it. He's hacking away at the foundation of the existing system. But the nature of the system is that every time its weakness is revealed, it creates an opportunity for it to expand and grow itself. So if there isn't someone there willing and able to step into that vacuum and provide an alternative, to be engineering the alternate system on the side, then what he's doing is actually facilitating the process of the people he claims to be targeting, because the system is just the nature of it. The architropic nature of it is that as you reveal that it's insufficient or that it's weak or that it's bad in some way, that's just a justification for expanding it and creating new areas for it to step into and expand and enlarge its power. So what he's doing on its own, absent any other participation or any other people building alongside of him, is he's actually facilitating his own demise and the demise of everyone around him. But he can be bailed out by other people if they start building and they create the alternatives for people, the lifeboats for people to step onto as this Titanic goes under, because it's going to go under. It's inevitable that it will. But again, if you're thinking of this in terms of public-private, and you're thinking of it in terms of at the level of the state and at the level at the organizational level, then you're not going to have good analysis of what happens. You have to think of it in terms of the individuals who are involved. And the individuals who are at the top, when the federal government goes down, the individuals within it are going to have all the different possibilities at their disposal to transition into something else. And, it wasn't my fault. I was just a helpless victim along the way here. So when the Titanic sinks, the people who go down with it aren't necessarily going to be the people who should, the people who should be responsible. When the Titanic sinks, the people who go down with it are going to be the people who thought that they could save it, the people who thought that it was it just needed to be overhauled, it just needed to be rehabilitated. That's why those are the ones who always wind up being the first ones up against the wall, because they're the ones who bear the brunt of the responsibility for the collapse, because they're the ones who claim to believe in it. If you believe in it and you say this is a good thing, you're the one advocating for it, and it just collapsed and fell apart, well, you must be the ones who are responsible for it. The people who were in power, they're able to wash their hands of it because they are the ones who have the power. So if you want to survive the incoming collapse, you can't be one of the people who's trying to rehabilitate the system as it's collapsing.
You need to be the one building the lifeboat.
Right.
And, frankly, and you need to, and by the way, just because you build the lifeboat doesn't mean they can't take it from you.
Right. Which, again, is another engineering problem.
I'm going to keep extending this analogy.
Right.
Yeah, that's another engineering problem is how do you build a lifeboat that, they can't take from that? Again, that is the thing you need to be doing as an agorist. You need to be the one building the lifeboats.
Right.
Because if you know that you're on the Titanic and you have a chance to, bring your own lifeboat and preferably some sort of heating device too, it's gonna be cold. You need to be the one who has that, or you need to be inventing the clothes that you can be the captain that sneaks onto the lifeboat in women's clothes. It's like that. Those are your alternatives. And you need to. And the way you do this is, hey, again, the left is willing to pay for private statecraft. That's their solution. Is that they see that the system is collapsing, and they're advertising to private corporate. How about you guys provide us the statecraft services we want? How about you look at the censorship thing? Is that once Republicans start really advertising that, hey, we're willing to pay you to actually go back and censor the left, and we're really going to start paying for our freedom, like moving to Gab. We're willing to start paying Gab, to give us our freedom, and paying, Apple to take away the left's freedom of speech. It's like, this is how that's gonna end up. This is you need to be looking at censorship as this is private statecraft.
Yes.
And this is exactly the same as the federal government statecraft. This is real aggression if you're a libertarian, or well, not if you're a legacy libertarian, but just because it's private statecraft doesn't make it any less statecraft.
Right.
But this is what that is: private, corporate, leftist, global government. And that, but like when you look at Apple or Amazon, behold your new federal government.
Bingo.
Yeah, the federal government's going to collapse. Behold your new federal government.
Right. So you better put yourself in a position where that was this. There's this story going on with Amazon that they're creating some sort of a network with all of their different devices that it's like a new thing in the Internet of Things and it's going to be opt out. Like you're going to be opted in unless you opt out. And then with this, I haven't looked at all the details of it, but it's like once you see the pattern, once you see how it happens, it's like I don't need to know the details. I know you can give me all the technical blah 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 blah. Whatever. I know what they're trying to do. I know how they're trying to do it, and it's just another way that they're trying to enhance their network and the ground that they can cover, that they can police. And so they're going to need to do that through being able to see, being able to hear, and being able to physically access those regions. So everything that they do is going to be targeted toward facilitating one of those things or the other. Michael Dewey, a friend of mine from college, he just commented and he said, "What do I need to do to be a guest on your show? Just hit me up on Twitter at RealKingPilled. If you DM'd me there, there's like the second thing where like extra DMs go that are not in your main DMs. And I just realized the other day there's a whole bunch of unanswered messages in there from people that I didn't even realize had DM'd me. So if you're one of those people, then I'm sorry. I'm going to get back to you as soon as I can. And so just reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter, and we'll have a chat, and we'll talk to you soon. That being said, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code KING, 25% off any order over $75. Follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled. Follow Liberal Steve on Twitter at Messina Inc. That's MESSINAINC. Yeah, go follow Liberal Steve. and
Don't,
then
don't follow him.
don't follow him. Oh yeah. He doesn't want you to follow him, but we don't care what he wants. You have to go follow him anyways. And then finally you can follow our good friend Mr. Popular here at Popular Liberty _ And yeah, I think that's it. We will be back here. Let's see, today's Monday. We'll be back here on Thursday for another episode, and we will see you guys then. Toodles.